Your mother believed you could do anything. Anthony stood at the dining table, looking at his 8-year-old twin sons. Their shoulders pressed together like they could split the weight of failing between them. Was she wrong? The boys didn't answer. They'd learned that silence hurt less than trying to explain what they couldn't understand themselves. Michael's tears fell quietly. Victor's hand found his brother's under the table. Their father grabbed his jacket and left the room. And in that moment, in that crushing, suffocating quiet, someone else was listening. Someone who knew exactly what it felt like to believe you were born broken. Catherine wasn't supposed to hear any of it. She'd been carrying a basket of folded towels past the dining room when Anthony's voice stopped her cold. She stood there just outside the doorway, frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. It wasn't the anger in his words that shook her. It was what came after. That silence, the kind that sounds like a child's soul collapsing in on itself. She knew that sound. She'd lived inside it for years back, when every teacher looked at her like she was wasting their time. When words on a page looked like they were drowning. When she sat alone in her car at 19, staring at a job application she couldn't fill out, wondering if maybe everyone had been right about her all along, wondering if God had made a mistake when he made her. But standing there now, listening to two little boys trying not to cry, something stirred deep inside her chest. Not pity, recognition. Through the open door, she could see them. Michael wiping his face with his sleeve. Victor squeezing his brother's hand, so tight his knuckles turned white. Two boys who looked identical in everything, especially their shame. And for the first time in a long time, Catherine felt it. That quiet whisper she'd almost forgotten how to hear. This is why you're here. Not to scrub counters or fold laundry, but to see what nobody else could. Because sometimes, when the world has written you off, and you've got nothing left but your own scars, God puts you exactly where you need to be. Right in front of someone who's breaking the exact same way you once did. But before we begin, hit that subscribe button, like this video, and tell me where in the world you're watching from. And if you've ever felt like you were too broken to be loved, stay with me. Because this story is about to show you that sometimes the people who save us are the ones nobody sees coming. Catherine knelt beside Michael's chair, the green overlay still resting on the open page. For a moment, neither of them moved. Just sat there in the quiet of the library, dust floating through the afternoon, light coming in from the window. Michael stared at the words beneath the green sheet. His finger traced the first line. The cat sat. His voice was so soft she almost didn't hear it. On the mat. He looked up at her, eyes wide with something she hadn't seen in them before. Wonder. I read it. I actually read it. Catherine's throat tightened. She nodded, couldn't speak for a second. Victor stepped closer, his arms crossed tight over his chest like he was protecting himself from disappointment. Does it work for everyone? Both. Two. I don't know, Catherine said honestly. But we can find out. She pulled another overlay from her pocket, this one blue, handed it to Victor. He took it like it might break, placed it carefully over his own book, started reading. His voice shook at first, then steadied. By the third sentence, he wasn't stumbling anymore. Michael grabbed his brother's arm. You're doing it. Victor's eyes filled with tears. He didn't stop reading, just kept going, his voice getting stronger with every word, like he was proving something to himself. When he finished the paragraph, he looked at Catherine. Why didn't anyone show us this before? Catherine didn't have a good answer for that. So she just said, I don't know, sweetheart, but we're going to figure it out now. Together, that became their rhythm. Every afternoon while Anthony was away, while the house was quiet and no one was watching, Catherine met the boys in the sunroom. Not the library. Too formal, too much like school. The sunroom felt different. Warm, safe, light pouring through the windows, plants growing wild in the corners, the old couch where their mother used to read to them before she died. Catherine brought supplies from the kitchen, shaving cream, food coloring, baking sheets. The twins looked at her like she'd lost her mind. We're going to write with shaving cream? Michael asked. We're going to feel the words, Catherine said. Your hands need to learn them as much as your eyes do. She spread the cream across the tray, smooth and thick, showed them how to trace letters with their fingers. Say it, feel it, write it. Michael spelled cat in the cream, then dog, then mom. His face lit up. It's like drawing. Exactly, Catherine said. Your brain loves this. Victor preferred movement. He couldn't sit still for more than 5 minutes, So Catherine let him walk, let him read while pacing circles around the coffee table. "You think better when you move," she told him. "So move." He did, and for the first time in his life, the words didn't swim away from him. By the third day, something shifted. Michael finished his homework in 20 minutes, work that usually took him 2 hours. Victor read 4 pages of a chapter book without stopping once. They started laughing again, real laughs, the kind that filled the room and made the house feel alive. Mrs. Patterson, the head housekeeper, noticed. She'd pass by the sunroom and pause, listening to their voices. Never said a word, just watched Catherine with an expression that was hard to read. The gardener, Mr. Alvarez, smiled when he saw them through the window one afternoon, gave Catherine a small nod, like he understood something the others didn't. But there were whispers too. In the kitchen, in the laundry room. "She's overstepping. She's just the help. What happens when Mr. Smith finds out?" Catherine heard them, felt the weight of their judgment pressing down on her shoulders every time she walked through the house. But when she looked at Michael spelling words in shaving cream, his whole face glowing with pride, she couldn't stop. When she watched Victor read aloud while walking in circles, his voice steady and strong, she knew. This was bigger than her job, bigger than their opinions. This was what she was meant to do. Friday afternoon came too fast. Anthony would be home tomorrow. The conference in Singapore had ended early. Catherine wiped down the coffee table, packed away the colored overlays, the textured letters, the baking sheets still smelling like shaving cream. Michael grabbed her hand. "You're not going to stop, are you?" She looked down at him, at both of them standing there, fear creeping back into their eyes. "I don't know," she said quietly. "Your dad might not understand." "Then we'll make him understand," Victor said, his jaw set with determination that looked just like his father's. Catherine smiled, sad and hopeful at the same time. Maybe. That night, she couldn't sleep. Lay awake in her small room above the garage, staring at the ceiling, praying for the first time in years. "God, if this is real, if I'm supposed to be here, please let him see it. Please." She didn't know if he was listening, but she closed her eyes and hoped anyway. The next afternoon, everything changed. Anthony came home 3 days early. No warning, no phone call. Just walked through the front door at 2 o'clock, exhausted from the flight, wanting nothing more than silence and sleep. He heard laughter coming from the sunroom. His son's laughter. He hadn't heard that sound in over a year. He set down his briefcase, walked toward the noise, pushed open the French doors, and froze. Catherine sat between the twins at the coffee table. Michael had shaving cream spread across a baking tray in front of him, tracing the word "believe" with his finger. Victor was mid-stride, walking his usual circle around the couch, reading aloud from a book about dinosaurs. All 3 of them were smiling, and Anthony, standing in the doorway, travel bag still slung over his shoulder, couldn't move. The table was covered, colored plastic sheets, letter tiles with different textures, headphones connected to an audiobook, a mess of learning that looked nothing like the rigid tutoring sessions he'd paid thousands for. "What the hell is this?" The words came out sharper than he meant them to. Catherine's heart dropped into her stomach. She stood quickly, hands already reaching for a towel to wipe the cream away. "Mr. Smith, I can explain. You're the housekeeper." His voice was tight, confusion twisting into something harder. "I hired you to clean, not to." "Dad, wait." Victor's voice cut through the air like a crack of lightning. He stepped forward, the book still clutched in his hand, his whole body trembling. "I read 12 pages today." Tears filled his eyes. 12, without stopping once. Anthony stared at his son, at the boy who hadn't finished a single chapter book in 2 years. "Please don't make her stop," Victor whispered. Michael scrambled to his feet, holding up the baking tray, shaving cream dripping onto the floor. "Look, Dad, I spelled dinosaur right. I never get it right." He grabbed his homework from the edge of the table, pages of math problems, handwriting practice, reading comprehension. Completed, nearly perfect. Handed it to his father with shaking hands. Anthony took it, stared down at his son's neat, careful work. His jaw worked. No words came. Catherine stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. She forced herself to meet his eyes. "I'm sorry I didn't ask permission, Mr. Smith." Her voice was quiet, steady, but I recognized something in them, something I've lived with my whole life. Silence pressed down on the room like a weight. The twins stood side by side, hands clasped together, terrified. Anthony's eyes moved from the homework to their faces, his sons' faces, glowing with something he hadn't seen since Rebecca died. Pride. When he finally spoke, his voice barely made it past his throat. "My office, now." He turned and walked away, his footsteps heavy on the wood floor. Catherine's stomach twisted into knots. The boys looked up at her, their faces crumpling. "I'm sorry," she whispered, kneeling down between them. "I'm so sorry." Michael threw his arms around her neck. Victor buried his face in her shoulder, and for a moment, Catherine just held them, feeling their small bodies shake, wishing she could protect them from what was coming. The walk to Anthony's office felt like walking to her own execution. Every step down that long stretch toward his door, Catherine's mind raced. She'd be fired. Of course she'd be fired. She'd overstepped, broken trust, done exactly what she'd been warned not to do her whole life, tried to be more than she was allowed to be. She knocked. "Come in." Anthony sat behind his desk, laptop open in front of him. His jacket was off, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, but his face, she couldn't read it. "Sit." She sat, folded her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking. Long, suffocating silence. Finally, he spoke. "Tell me exactly what you did with my sons." Not angry, not accusing, just tired, and something else she couldn't name. Catherine took a breath, then another. "I saw dyslexia," she said quietly. "Classic signs, the way they reverse letters, how long it takes them to process words, the way Michael shuts down when he's overwhelmed, the way Victor can't sit still because his brain needs movement to focus." She paused. "I recognized it because I have it too." Anthony's eyes flickered. Surprise, maybe disbelief. She kept going. "I failed out of 3 schools before I turned 18. Teachers told me I'd never amount to anything, that I was slow, lazy, wasting everyone's time." Her voice steadied. "I didn't learn to read properly until I was 23. A woman at a community literacy program taught me using the same methods I used with your sons." She leaned forward slightly, her hands gripping the edge of the chair. "Mr. Smith, your boys aren't failing because they're not trying. They're failing because nobody's taught them in the language their brains actually speak. Every tutor you hired taught the same way, the way that works for most kids. But not for them. Not for brains like theirs." Anthony was quiet. His fingers drummed once against the desk, then stopped. He turned his laptop screen toward her. Security footage. The sunroom camera. His sons laughing. Engaged. Confident. Learning. "I haven't seen them smile like that since." His voice cracked. He cleared his throat. "Since their mother died." Catherine's chest tightened. Anthony stood abruptly, walked to the window, stood there with his back to her, shoulders rigid. "I thought if I pushed harder," he said, voice low, "hired better tutors, spent more money, I thought I could fix them." He turned around, and for the first time, Catherine saw it. The grief, the guilt, the weight of a father who'd been drowning and didn't know how to ask for help. "But they were never broken, were they?" "No," Catherine whispered. "They never were." Anthony crossed his arms, looked at her really, looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "I need you to teach me what you're doing." Catherine blinked. "Sir? Teach me." His voice was raw, desperate. "Teach me how to see my own sons." Anthony didn't sleep that night. Catherine left his office around 7, quietly, still unsure if she had a job in the morning. The boys had already eaten dinner with Mrs. Patterson mac and cheese, their favorite, and been sent upstairs to bed early. The house fell into its usual evening silence, but Anthony's office light stayed on. He sat at his desk, laptop glowing in the darkness, and started searching. Dyslexia symptoms in children. Dyslexia versus learning disability. How to recognize dyslexia in twins. Article after article. Research study after research study. Videos of children learning to read using colored overlays. Testimonials from parents who'd spent years thinking their kids were lazy, unmotivated, broken. The words on the screen blurred together. He clicked on a diagnostic checklist. "Does your child reverse letters like B and dude?" "Yes." Michael did that constantly. "Does your child avoid reading aloud?" "Yes, both of them." "Does your child have difficulty with spelling, even simple words?" "Yes." "Does your child seem intelligent in conversation but struggle with written work?" Anthony's hand stopped moving on the mouse. "Yes." "God?" "Yes." They could talk about anything: space, dinosaurs, how engines worked. They asked questions that stunned him sometimes with their depth, but put a worksheet in front of them, and they shut down completely. He kept reading. One article mentioned that dyslexia often went undiagnosed in children from wealthy families because parents could afford tutors who just worked harder, pushed longer, drilled the same methods over and over without ever asking why the child wasn't learning. Anthony's stomach turned. He opened another tab, searched for the tutors he'd hired over the past 2 years. Not one of them specialized in learning disabilities. Not one. He'd spent $50,000 on people who were teaching his sons the wrong way, and he'd blamed Michael and Victor for not trying hard enough. His throat tightened. He pulled up the security footage again, watched his sons in the sunroom with Catherine. Really watched this time. The way Michael's whole face changed when he traced letters in the shaving cream, the joy in Victor's voice as he paced and read without stumbling, the way they looked at Catherine not like a housekeeper, not like a tutor, like someone who saw them. Anthony's hands started shaking. He pushed away from the desk, stood up, paced to the window, stared out at the dark yard, the pool lights reflecting off the water. Rebecca's face came to him, the way she used to watch the boys when they were younger, that crease between her eyebrows when she was worried about something. "Anthony, I think something's different about how they learn," she'd said once, maybe a year before the accident. "I don't think they're just being difficult." He'd brushed it off, told her they were fine, just needed more discipline, more structure. And then she died. And he never got to tell her she was right. His chest cracked open. He sank into the chair by the window, buried his face in his hands, and for the first time since the funeral, Anthony Smith let himself break. He cried for his sons, for the years he'd spent pushing them when he should have been listening, for Rebecca, who'd known something was wrong and never got the chance to fix it, for every time he'd made his boys feel like failures when they were just trying to survive. By dawn, Anthony's eyes were swollen and dry. He hadn't slept, hadn't moved from the chair except to pour himself coffee that had gone cold hours ago. But he'd made a decision. At 7:30, he called his assistant. "Cancel everything for the next 2 weeks. I don't care what it is. Cancel it." At 8, he found Catherine in the kitchen, washing breakfast dishes. She turned when she heard his footsteps, her face guarded. He must have looked like hell. He felt like it. "I stayed up all night," he said, his voice rough, "reading about dyslexia, about how kids like mine," he stopped, corrected himself, "about how my sons learn." Catherine set down the dish she was holding. "I need to get them tested," Anthony continued, "professionally, by someone who actually knows what they're looking at." "That's good," Catherine said softly. "That's really good. And I need you there." He looked at her directly. "When they do the testing, when we get the results, I need you to help me understand what it all means." Catherine hesitated. "Mr. Smith, I'm not a doctor. I'm not even a teacher. You're the only person who's seen them." His voice broke slightly. "Really seen them. And I need you to teach me how to do that." She studied his face for a long moment, saw the exhaustion, the regret, the desperate hope of a father who'd finally stopped running. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll help." Anthony nodded, turned to leave, then stopped. "Catherine?" She looked up. "Thank you." His voice was barely a whisper. "For not giving up on them when I almost did." He walked out before she could respond. Catherine stood alone in the kitchen, her hands still wet from the dishes, tears sliding down her face. For the first time since she'd arrived at this house, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, God had put her exactly where she was supposed to be. Dr. Sarah Chen arrived on a Tuesday morning. Anthony had hired the best educational psychologist in the state, someone who specialized in learning disabilities, who'd worked with hundreds of children like his sons. Catherine watched from the kitchen window as the doctor pulled up in a silver sedan, carrying a leather bag and a calm expression that suggested she'd seen this 1,000 times before. The twins were already nervous. They'd barely touched their breakfast. "What if she says we're stupid?" Michael whispered to Catherine while she cleared their plates. Catherine knelt beside his chair, looked him straight in the eyes. "She won't, because you're not. But what if the tests say, the tests are going to show what I already know?" Her voice was steady. "Sure, that your brains are brilliant. They just work differently." Victor stood by the window, arms crossed, watching his father talk to Dr. Chen on the front steps. "He looks scared," Victor said quietly. Catherine glanced out. Anthony's shoulders were tense, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, a posture she'd never seen on him before. "He is," she said, "but not of you. He's scared he missed this for too long." Victor turned to look at her. "You think he feels bad?" "I think he feels everything." The testing took 6 hours. Dr. Chen set up in the library, spreading assessment materials across the table, puzzles, reading passages, memory games, pattern recognition tasks. The boys went in separately, Michael first, then Victor. Anthony and Catherine waited in his office. Neither of them knew what to do with the silence. Catherine sat on the edge of the couch, hands folded in her lap, trying not to watch the clock. Anthony stood by the window, pretending to read emails on his phone, but she could see he wasn't actually looking at the screen. An hour passed, then 2. "Do you think they're okay in there?" Anthony finally asked, his voice tight. "Dr. Chen knows what she's doing," Catherine said. "And the boys are stronger than you think." Anthony turned to look at her. "Really look at her? You care about them?" It wasn't a question, just an observation. Catherine met his eyes. "Yes." "Why?" The question hung in the air between them. Catherine thought about lying, about saying something polite and distant, but she was tired of pretending she didn't feel what she felt. "Because nobody cared about me," she said quietly. "When I was their age, when I was failing and teachers were giving up, and I thought I was the problem." Her voice caught. "Nobody fought for me. Nobody looked closer. And I spent 15 years believing I was broken." She looked down at her hands. "I don't want them to spend 15 years believing that." Anthony was quiet for a long time. Then he crossed the room and sat down in the chair across from her, not behind his desk, not standing above her, just there, close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his face. "I'm sorry," he said. Catherine looked up, confused. "For what?" "For whatever they did to you, whoever made you feel that way." His jaw tightened. "And for almost doing the same thing to my sons. You didn't know?" "I should have." His voice was raw, honest. "Rebecca tried to tell me, and I didn't listen. I was too busy, too distracted, too convinced that if I just pushed hard enough, everything would fall into place." He rubbed his face with both hands. "I've spent 3 years trying to be both parents, trying to fill the space she left, and I've failed at all of it." "You haven't failed," Catherine said softly. "You're here now. That's what matters." "Is it?" "Yes." They sat in the quiet after that, not uncomfortable, just present. Two people who'd both been broken in different ways, waiting to see if they could help two boys avoid the same fate. Around 4 o'clock, Dr. Chen knocked on the office door. Anthony stood so fast he nearly knocked over his chair. "Come in." Dr. Chen stepped inside, her expression calm but serious. She carried a folder thick with papers. "Mr. Smith, Miss Walsh." She nodded to both of them. "The boys did beautifully. They're resting in the kitchen with some snacks." "And?" Anthony's voice was barely steady. Dr. Chen set the folder on the desk, opened it to the first page of results. "Both boys have superior IQ scores," she began. "Michael tested at 127, Victor at 129. Anthony's breath caught. "They also both have severe dyslexia and ADHD, Dr. Chen continued. "Classic presentation. The kind that's often missed because the child is intelligent enough to compensate for years before the system catches up." She turned another page, showing charts and graphs that meant nothing to Catherine but everything to Anthony. "They're currently reading at a 2nd grade level, despite being in 3rd grade. Their processing speed for written language is significantly delayed. But," she looked up at both of them, "the coping strategies they're using are remarkable. Graduate-level interventions." Dr. Chen's eyes settled on Catherine. "Who's been working with them?" Anthony gestured toward Catherine. "She has." Dr. Chen studied her with new interest. "Miss Walsh, have you worked with dyslexic children before?" Catherine shook her head. "Just one. Me." Dr. Chen's eyebrows lifted. She smiled, the kind of smile that held respect. "Then you have an intuitive understanding that most special education teachers spend years trying to develop." She closed the folder. "These boys are lucky to have you." Catherine's throat tightened. She couldn't speak. Anthony's hand found the back of his chair, gripping it like he needed something to hold him upright. "So what do we do now?" he asked. Dr. Chen looked between them. "You keep doing exactly what you're doing, and you fight like hell to make sure their school does the same." The call came, 3 days later, Anthony was in a meeting when his assistant knocked on his office door, her face apologetic. "Mr. Smith, Ashford Academy is on the line. The headmaster says it's urgent." Anthony excused himself, stepped into the hallway, pressed the phone to his ear. "Mr. Smith, this is Headmaster Whitmore. We need to schedule a meeting regarding Michael and Victor. Tomorrow, if possible." Something in the man's tone made Anthony's spine stiffen. "What's this about?" "It's better discussed in person. Can you come in at 9? Anthony agreed, hung up, stood there in the empty hallway with dread settling like stone in his gut. That evening, he told Catherine. She was folding laundry in the utility room, the twins upstairs doing homework they were actually completing now, with colored overlays and extra time. "The school wants to meet," Anthony said from the doorway. Catherine looked up, her hands stilling on a towel. "Did they say why?" "No, but I can guess." Catherine set the towel down. "You want me to come?" Anthony hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I do." Ashford Academy sat on 15 acres of manicured grounds, all brick buildings and ivy-covered walls. The kind of school that prided itself on legacy, excellence, and test scores that kept it ranked in the top 5% nationally. Anthony had donated $2 million over the past 3 years. His name was on a library wing. None of that mattered when he and Catherine walked into Headmaster Whitmore's office the next morning. Whitmore was a tall man in his 60s, silver-haired and polished, with the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. He stood when they entered, gestured to the chairs across from his desk. "Mr. Smith, thank you for coming." Anthony didn't sit. "What's this about?" Whitmore's smile thinned. "Please, sit. This won't take long." Anthony sat. Catherine stayed standing by the door until Anthony looked back at her, nodded toward the empty chair beside him. She sat. Whitmore folded his hands on his desk. "Mr. Smith, we've been reviewing Michael and Victor's academic progress, or lack thereof, and the board has made a recommendation, which is, we believe it would be in the boys' best interest to repeat 3rd grade, or alternatively, transfer to an institution better equipped to handle their special needs." The words landed like a slap. Anthony's jaw tightened. "Special needs? They've failed multiple assessments, Mr. Smith. Their reading and writing scores are significantly below grade level. Ashford Academy maintains a standard of excellence, and my sons have dyslexia." Anthony pulled Dr. Chen's report from his bag, dropped it on the desk, "and ADHD, both diagnosed by one of the top educational psychologists in the state." Whitmore glanced at the report, but didn't pick it up. "Yes, well, that's precisely why we're recommending a transfer. We're not a special education facility." "They don't need a special education facility." Anthony's voice was rising now. "They need teachers who understand how they learn. Mr. Smith, with all due respect, Ashford has a reputation to maintain. Our test scores—" "Your test scores?" Anthony leaned forward. "You're talking about kicking out my sons because of your test scores?" Whitmore's expression hardened. "We have standards. Your son's performance affects our rankings, our college placement statistics. They're 8 years old." "Yes, and already 2 years behind." Catherine's hands gripped the arms of her chair. She wanted to speak but didn't know if she had the right. Anthony saw her hesitation, looked at Whitmore. "Miss Walsh has been working with my sons. In 2 weeks, they've made more progress than they did in 2 years of your teaching." Whitmore's eyes flicked to Catherine, dismissive. "Miss Walsh is your housekeeper, correct?" Catherine felt the words like a blade. "Yes," she said quietly. "Then I'm sure she means well. But," Whitmore smiled condescendingly, "she's not a certified educator. Her methods, while perhaps well-intentioned, aren't relevant to this proceeding." Something in Anthony's expression went cold. He stood slowly. "Then, let me be clear, Headmaster. I'm withdrawing both my sons from Ashford Academy, effective immediately." Whitmore blinked. "Mr. Smith, I don't think you understand. And I'm withdrawing my $2 million annual donor pledge." The room went silent. Whitmore's face paled. "Now, let's not be hasty. I'm also telling every parent I know exactly why." Anthony's voice was steady now, certain, that this school would rather protect its rankings than teach children how to learn. He turned to Catherine. "Let's go." Catherine stood, her legs shaking. Anthony walked to the door, then stopped, looked back at Whitmore. "My sons don't need a different school. They need people who actually see them, and if you can't do that, then you don't deserve to teach anyone's children." He walked out. Catherine followed, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. They didn't speak until they reached the parking lot. Anthony stood by his car, hands braced on the hood, breathing hard. Catherine waited, didn't know what to say. Finally, Anthony looked up at her. "Did I just ruin my son's education?" "No," Catherine said softly. "You just saved it." His eyes filled. He turned away, wiping at his face with the back of his hand. "I should have done that 2 years ago. You did it now. That's what matters." They stood there in the morning sun, two people who'd just burned a bridge and had no idea where the road led next. But for the first time in years, Anthony felt something he hadn't felt since Rebecca died. Hope. Anthony couldn't find the twins' baby books. He'd been searching the house for 2 days, wanting to show Dr. Chen their early development records. Catherine had offered to help, moving through storage closets and spare rooms with quiet efficiency. They ended up in the attic. Dust floated through beams of afternoon light. Boxes stacked on boxes, years of life packed away and forgotten. Catherine pulled open a container labeled Rebecca, personal. Inside, journals, dozens of them. Anthony froze when he saw them. "I didn't know she kept these," he whispered. Catherine started to close the box, sensing she'd stepped into something sacred. But Anthony reached past her, lifted one out. The leather was worn, the pages dog-eared. He opened it to a random entry. His hands started shaking. "What is it?" Catherine asked softly. He didn't answer, just kept reading, his face going pale. Then he sank onto an old trunk, the journal open in his lap. Catherine waited, didn't move, barely breathed. "She knew," Anthony finally said, his voice breaking. Rebecca knew something was wrong. He turned the journal toward Catherine. "Let her read. March 15th. Michael reversed his B's and D's again today. The teacher says he's not paying attention. But I watched him. Anthony. He was paying attention. He just can't see them the right way. I need to get them tested. I need to understand what's happening before they start believing they're failing." Catherine's throat closed. Anthony flipped forward. Another entry. June 3rd. "Victor can't sit still during reading time. His teacher called it behavioral issues. But when I let him walk around while I read to him, he remembered every word, every single word. There's something here, something everyone's missing." Another page. September 12th. "I've been researching dyslexia. Everything I'm reading sounds like my boys. I'm calling that specialist next week. Anthony thinks I'm worrying too much. But I know my sons. I know something's different." The date on that entry was 2 weeks before she died. Anthony's shoulders started shaking. Catherine knelt beside him, her hand hovering near his arm, unsure if she should touch him. "She tried to tell me," he whispered. "I remember that conversation. I told her they were fine, that she was overthinking it." His voice cracked completely. "And then she was gone, and I spent 3 years pushing them the same way everyone else did." Tears streamed down his face. "I failed her. I failed them." "No." Catherine's voice was firm. She grabbed his hand without thinking. "You didn't know. You were grieving. You were trying to survive. I should have listened. She would forgive you." Catherine squeezed his hand. "And your sons already have." Anthony looked at her, really looked at her, his eyes red and raw. "How do you know?" "Because I see the way they look at you now." Her voice softened. "They don't see a man who failed them. They see their father trying. And that's everything." They sat there in the dusty attic light, his hand still in hers, surrounded by boxes of a life that was gone but not forgotten. After a long moment, Anthony pulled another journal from the box, opened it near the end, found an entry dated a month before Rebecca's death. His breath caught. "Listen to this," he said, his voice barely steady. Catherine leaned closer. "October 8th. I had the most beautiful dream last night. Anthony and I opened a learning center for children like ours, a place where kids who learn differently aren't made to feel broken, where teachers actually see them. We called it Hope House. I know it sounds impossible, but maybe one day, when the boys are older, when we understand their needs better, maybe we could do something. Maybe we could help other families who feel as lost as we do right now." Anthony closed the journal carefully, set it on top of the box, covered his face with both hands, and broke. Not the quiet tears from before. This was deeper, years of grief and guilt and regret pouring out of him in waves. Catherine didn't say anything, just stayed beside him, let him shatter, let him feel it all. When he finally looked up, his voice was raw but certain. "We're going to build it." Catherine blinked. "What?" "Her dream. The learning center." He looked at her with eyes that were still wet but suddenly clear. "We're going to build it for her, for our sons, for every child who needs someone to see them. Anthony." She'd never used his first name before. It slipped out without thinking. That's a huge thing." "I know." He stood, still holding Rebecca's journal. "But you're going to help me. You're going to run it." "I can't. I'm not." "You're exactly who should." He turned to face her fully. "You understand these kids because you were one of them. That's worth more than any degree. But I don't have credentials. I don't have." "Then we'll get you credentials." His voice was steady now, determined. "I'll pay for your education, whatever it takes. You'll go to school, get your degree, your teaching certification, and when you're ready, we'll open the center together." Catherine stared at him, her mind reeling. "Why would you do that for me?" Anthony's expression softened. "Because you did something for my sons that no one else could. You saw them. And maybe," his voice caught, "maybe that's what Rebecca's been trying to tell me all along, that the people who save us aren't always the ones with the biggest credentials. Sometimes they're just the ones who know what it's like to be broken." Catherine's eyes filled. For the first time in her life, someone was offering her more than she'd ever dared to dream, and she was terrified. But she whispered anyway, "Okay." Catherine sat alone in her room that night, staring at the laptop Anthony had given her. A new laptop, still in the box, for school applications. She'd opened it an hour ago, created an account, pulled up the website for the local community college, but her hands wouldn't move. The cursor blinked in the empty text box. "Tell us about yourself." Catherine had no idea where to start. She was 28 years old, high school dropout, former foster kid who'd lived in her car, a woman who cleaned other people's houses for a living. Who was she to think she could become a teacher? Her finger hovered over the keyboard. Then she closed the laptop, put her head in her hands, and let herself feel the weight of what she'd agreed to. Downstairs, Anthony couldn't sleep either. He sat in the living room, Rebecca's journals spread across the coffee table in front of him. He'd been reading them for hours, learning his wife all over again through her words. She'd been scared too, scared of getting it wrong, scared of failing their sons, but she'd written it anyway, dreamed it anyway. Maybe we could help other families who feel as lost as we do right now. Anthony traced the words with his finger. "I'm sorry I didn't listen," he whispered into the empty room. "I'm sorry I waited so long." The house settled around him. Quiet, still, but not lonely. Not anymore. Upstairs, he heard footsteps. Catherine, moving around in her room. He wondered if she was as terrified as he was. The next morning, Catherine came down early to start breakfast. She found Anthony already in the kitchen, coffee brewing, the twins' lunchboxes lined up on the counter. He looked up when she walked in. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "No." She moved to the sink, started washing her hands out of habit, even though there was nothing to clean yet. "You?" Not really. They stood there in the pre-dawn quiet, two people who'd promised each other something impossible and were now facing the reality of it. "I don't know if I can do this," Catherine said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Anthony set down his coffee cup. "What part?" "Any of it." She turned to face him. "College, teaching, running a center. I failed out of school 3 times, Anthony. What if I fail again?" "You won't. You don't know that." "Yes, I do." He moved closer. "Because this time, you're not doing it alone. And this time, you actually want it." Catherine's eyes filled. "What if I'm not good enough?" "You already are." His voice was steady. "Sure. My sons are proof of that." She looked down, trying to blink back tears. Anthony hesitated, then reached out and gently lifted her chin, so she had to meet his eyes. "Catherine, you spent your whole life being told you weren't enough, but you are. You always have been, and I need you to start believing that." A tear slipped down her cheek. "I'm scared." "So am I." He dropped his hand. "I'm terrified I'll mess this up, that I'll fail Rebecca's dream, that I'll let my sons down again." "You won't." "Then we won't." He smiled slightly. "We'll just have to be scared together." Footsteps sounded on the stairs. The twins appeared in the doorway, hair messy, still in their pajamas. "Why are you both up so early?" Michael asked, rubbing his eyes. Catherine quickly wiped her face. Just making breakfast. Victor studied them both with the kind of knowing look that 8-year-olds sometimes have. Were you crying? Catherine started to deny it, but Anthony spoke first. We were talking about big changes. Sometimes, big changes are scary. Michael walked over to Catherine, wrapped his arms around her waist. Is it good scary or bad scary? Catherine's throat tightened. She knelt down so she was eye level with him. Good scary, she said softly. The kind that means something beautiful might happen if we're brave enough. Victor came closer. Are you going somewhere? No, sweetheart. I'm staying. But I'm going to go to school, to learn how to be a real teacher. You're already a real teacher, Victor said matter-of-factly. Michael nodded. The best one we ever had. Catherine pulled them both into a hug, her eyes closing against fresh tears. Over their heads, she met Anthony's gaze. He was watching them with an expression she couldn't quite name. Grief and gratitude mixed together, love for his sons, and something else, something that looked almost like hope. Pancakes? He asked quietly. Catherine smiled through her tears. Pancakes. That afternoon, Catherine opened the laptop again. This time, she started typing. My name is Catherine Walsh. I learned to read at 23 years old. For most of my life, I believed I was broken, that my brain didn't work the way it was supposed to, that I would never be more than I was. Then I met 2 boys who were breaking the same way I once did, and I realized something. I wasn't broken. I was just learning in a language no one had taught me yet. I want to become a teacher so I can be for other children what no one was for me, someone who sees them, really sees them, not as problems to fix, but as people who just need someone to believe in them first. She paused, read it over, then hit submit before fear could stop her. The application went through. Catherine closed the laptop slowly, put her hand over her heart and felt it beating hard and fast, and whispered a prayer she hadn't prayed in years. God, if this is real, if this is what you want from me, please don't let me fall. The house was quiet around her, but somewhere deep inside, where faith lives even when you've forgotten it's there, she felt something settle, not certainty, but peace, and for now, that was enough. 4 months passed like breathing. Catherine enrolled in community college, night classes, online courses, weekends buried in textbooks while the twins did their homework beside her at the kitchen table. Some nights she wanted to quit, stared at essays she'd rewritten 5 times and still didn't think were good enough, called herself foolish for thinking she could do this at 28 when she'd failed so completely at 18. But then Michael would look up from his reading and say, "You spelled that wrong," pointing at her paper with a grin, and she'd laugh. Fix it. Keep going. The twins transferred to a small progressive school across town. Smaller classes. Teachers trained in learning differences. Accommodations written into their education plans. Extra time, colored overlays, oral testing options. Within 6 weeks, both boys passed their first full exam. Catherine was there when Anthony got the email from their teacher. Watched his face go still, then crumble, then light up all at once. He showed her the screen with shaking hands. Michael, 87%. Victor, 92%. They did it, he whispered. They actually did it. Catherine's eyes filled. They always could. They just needed someone to let them. That night, Anthony took them all out to dinner. A real celebration. The twins ordered dessert first, laughing when the waiter pretended to be shocked. Catherine sat across from Anthony, watching him with his sons really present with them for the first time since she'd met him, laughing at their jokes, listening to their stories about school, asking questions that showed he actually cared about the answers. This was what healing looked like. Not perfect, not finished, but real. By winter, the plans for the learning center were underway. Anthony had purchased an old Victorian house on the edge of town, 3 stories, wraparound porch, big windows that let in light from every direction. It needed work, but the bones were good. He brought Catherine to see it on a Saturday morning. They stood in the empty front room, sunlight streaming through dusty windows, their breath visible in the cold air. "What do you think?" Anthony asked. Catherine turned slowly, taking it in. The high ceilings, the hardwood floors that creaked under her feet, the built-in shelves that could hold books. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Each room will be different," Anthony said, his voice filling with something she'd never heard from him before: excitement. "Sensory spaces, movement zones, quiet areas for kids who need stillness. Everything designed around how different brains actually learn. He pulled out architectural sketches, showed her the plans. Catherine looked at the drawings, her heart swelling in her chest. When can we open? A year, maybe less if construction goes smoothly. He looked at her. Will you be ready? Catherine thought about her college classes, the teaching credential she was working toward, the fear that still woke her up some nights. I don't know, she said honestly, but I'll try. That's all anyone can do. They walked through the empty house together, mapping out rooms in their minds. The twins ran ahead, their voices echoing through the hollow spaces, calling out which room they wanted to help decorate. In what would become the main learning area, Catherine stopped, placed her hand on the window frame. Rebecca would love this, she said quietly. Anthony came to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. She does, he said. I think she's been watching this whole time, making sure we got it right. Catherine looked at him, saw the peace in his face that hadn't been there 6 months ago. You miss her? Every day. His voice was steady. But I'm not drowning in it anymore. And I think, he paused, I think she'd be okay with that. They stood in the winter light, surrounded by the skeleton of a dream that was slowly becoming real. What should we call it? Catherine asked. Anthony smiled, pulled a small notebook from his pocket, one of Rebecca's journals, opened to a page near the end. Hope House. Catherine's breath caught. She already named it, Anthony said softly. Years ago. We're just catching up. That evening, back at the house, Catherine found a letter in her mailbox. Her hands shook as she opened it. Dear Miss Walsh, congratulations. You have been accepted into the special education credential program beginning next fall. She read it 3 times, then walked inside, found Anthony in his office, and handed him the letter without a word. He read it, looked up at her, smiled wider than she'd ever seen. You did it. We did it, she corrected. The twins appeared in the doorway, sensing something important. What happened? Victor asked. Catherine knelt down, pulled them both close. I'm going to be a real teacher, an official one. Michael's face lit up. Does that mean you can teach more kids like us? Yes, baby. That's exactly what it means. Victor looked at his father. Is the center really going to happen? Anthony nodded. It's really going to happen. And kids like us won't have to feel stupid anymore. Catherine's throat closed. No, sweetheart, they won't. Because we're going to show them what I showed you, that different doesn't mean broken. Michael threw his arms around her neck. You saved us, he whispered. Catherine held him tight, tears streaming down her face. No, baby, you saved me. 2 years later, the morning of the grand opening, Catherine stood in the center of what used to be an empty Victorian house and was now Hope House Learning Center. Everything was ready. Sensory rooms painted in soft colors, movement spaces with balance beams and yoga mats, quiet corners with beanbags and weighted blankets, shelves lined with books in every format, audiobooks, large print, graphic novels, colored overlays organized by shade, textured letters, art supplies, every tool a different kind of learner might need. And in the main entrance, a portrait of Rebecca Smith, her smile warm, her eyes kind. Beneath it, a plaque, for every child who was told they couldn't, and for every person who helped them see they could. Catherine traced the words with her finger. She'd be so proud of you, a voice said behind her. She turned. Anthony stood in the doorway, wearing a suit but looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. The twins flanked him on either side, 10 years old now, taller, confident, holding a ribbon for the ceremony. I hope so, Catherine said softly. I know so. Anthony walked closer. You turned her dream into something real. We did, Catherine corrected. All of us. Michael looked up at his mother's portrait. I wish she could see this. She can, Victor said quietly. I think she's been watching the whole time. By 9 o'clock, families started arriving. 47 children enrolled for the first semester. Each one carrying a story like the twins had carried years of being told they weren't trying hard enough, weren't smart enough, weren't enough. Catherine greeted them at the door. Not as a housekeeper anymore. As Director Catherine Walsh, certified special education teacher, the woman who'd built this place from nothing but pain and hope. One mother approached her, holding the hand of a small girl, maybe 7 years old, with red eyes and hunched shoulders. This is Emma, the mother said, her voice breaking. She told me last week she doesn't want to be alive anymore because she's too stupid for school. Catherine's heart cracked open. She knelt in front of Emma, waiting until the girl looked at her. "Hi, Emma. My name is Catherine, and I want to tell you something really important." She kept her voice gentle, steady. "I didn't learn to read until I was 23 years old. Do you know how old that is?" Emma shook her head. "Really, really old," Catherine said with a small smile. "Everyone told me I'd never be able to do it, that I wasn't smart enough, but they were wrong. My brain just needed different tools, and I think your brain might be the same." Emma's lip trembled. "Really? Really?" Catherine reached into her pocket, pulled out a green overlay. "Want to try something?" Emma nodded, barely. Catherine led her to a reading corner, opened a book, placed the overlay on the page. "Try now." Emma looked down. Her eyes widened. "The letters, they're not jumping as much." "That's your brain finding its language," Catherine said softly. Emma read the first sentence, stumbled once, kept going. By the third sentence, she was reading clearly. When she finished the paragraph, she looked up at Catherine with tears streaming down her face. "I did it." "You did," Catherine whispered, "and you're going to do it again, and again, until you stop being surprised by how brilliant you are." Emma threw her arms around Catherine's neck. Behind them, the mother covered her mouth, sobbing. Anthony watched from across the room, his own eyes wet. The ribbon-cutting ceremony happened at noon. Catherine stood beside Anthony on the front porch, the twins between them, holding giant scissors. Reporters had come, local news cameras, parents and children filling the yard. Anthony spoke first. "My wife Rebecca believed every child deserves to be seen for who they are, not who they can't be. She knew our sons needed something different. And if she were here, she'd tell you that this center exists because one woman saw what everyone else missed, that different doesn't mean less." He turned to Catherine, his voice thick with emotion. "Catherine, you didn't just save my sons. You honored my wife's dream in ways I never could have alone. Thank you." Catherine's throat tightened. She looked out at the crowd, at all the families who'd come, at Emma standing with her mother, at the twins smiling up at her. "I spent most of my life believing I was broken," she said, her voice carrying across the yard. "That God had made some kind of mistake when he made me. But standing here today, I know the truth. I wasn't broken. I was just being prepared. For this. For them." She gestured to the children. "Every child here deserves to know they're not failing. They're not lazy. They're not stupid. They're just learning in a different language. And we're going to teach them that language. We're going to show them they're not alone." Michael and Victor cut the ribbon together. It fell in 2 pieces, and Hope House opened its doors. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Catherine walked through the quiet building one last time. She stopped in front of Rebecca's portrait. "Thank you," she whispered, "for dreaming this, for believing in your boys when no one else did, for somehow making sure I ended up exactly where I needed to be." She felt a hand on her shoulder. "Anthony, she brought you to us," he said quietly. "I'm sure of it." Catherine turned to face him. "Do you really believe that?" "I do." His eyes held hers. "Some people come into your life exactly when you need them, not a moment sooner, not a moment later, just right on time." They stood close in the dimming light, 2 people who'd been broken in different ways and had somehow found healing in helping others. "Thank you," Catherine said, "for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." "Thank you," Anthony replied, "for teaching me how to see my own children." Outside, the sun was setting. Golden light poured through the windows, filling every corner of Hope House with warmth. And somewhere in the silence between heartbeats, in the space where grief becomes grace, Catherine felt it. That whisper she'd heard 2 years ago in a kitchen, holding 2 broken boys. "This is why you're here." She closed her eyes. And finally, after 28 years of feeling invisible, Catherine Walsh let herself believe what she'd spent her whole life trying to find. She was seen. She always had been. And now, she'd spend the rest of her life making sure every child who walked through these doors knew they were seen too. Not despite being different, but because being different was exactly what made them beautiful.